So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us on a Friday night, giving up your Belgium versus Italy viewing. Although I'm sure a few of you are double screening. For those of you who are joining us for one of these tastings for the first time, we're just going to give it another minute and 30 seconds before we formally start, just to make sure we've not lost any stragglers, and to make sure that everyone's recovered from the exhilarating high that was that's Spain-Switzerland penalty shootout.
I didn't tell you I knew who won. It's Belgium, right? So I want to spoil it.
Yeah, well, because you're a few hours ahead, is it? Although I think you're a few hours behind, so we're going to be spoiling the result on you. Do you follow soccer at all, Drew?
No, we're too busy making bourbon.
A good answer. That should be working for you there, George, now. There.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. A few more people coming in from the waiting room. Catherine says hello, Jonathan says hello, and Dara says hello, and Alan says hello. So hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us. There's a couple more people coming in from the waiting room. We'll just give it another 30 seconds or so. George says hi. How are you getting on? While we are just waiting, for anyone who's joining us, I don't know if you saw the news that because Whiskey Live is going ahead in March next year, we've launched the Celtic Whiskey Festival, which can be a virtual event that's going to be held in November. The first tasting went on sale for the 18th of November. It's a Redbreast 27 deconstruction, and there's going to be loads more coming online in the next few weeks. So if anyone hasn't seen it, it's definitely worth checking out. It's going to be a really, really high quality week of different tastings. So definitely worth checking out. So yeah. Perfect. We'll get started. So thank you everyone for joining us. For those of you who don't know, I'm Luke. I'm the manager down at the Celtic Whiskey Bar and Irish Whiskey Experience in Clarny, and I obviously part of our sister company is Celtic Whiskey, through who you would have bought the pack. We're down in the Clarny. We're the world's largest collection of Irish whiskey. As you can see, this is a virtual screen behind me, but it's a real photo of the bar. We have 1,500 different whiskies, including a huge selection of bourbons and a full Pappy range. So if anyone gets a lovely thirst after tonight for some more of it, you can come down and try it. And we're also home to a fantastic restaurant, cocktail menu, and the Irish Whiskey Experience, where we educate all and sundry about whiskey, particularly Irish, but not just focusing on Irish. We used to host monthly tastings with guests. I know Ian's come in and done a couple of tastings with us to really high standard. We've done a fair few bits with high spirits over the years down in Clarny, and it's always been fantastic. So we're absolutely thrilled to have the guys on tonight. It's an incredible honor to do a tasting of this range. As I mentioned in my email today, it's like a Champions League final or a World Cup of whiskey tastings. We've done some really, really high quality ones over the last year, but this one is quite special. I was looking online, I couldn't see another virtual event Ireland based that would have a lineup like this. So we're really, really lucky, and particularly to be joined by someone like Drew. It's a real privilege. So without further ado, I'm going to thank Ian, Drew, and George for joining us, and I'm going to pass you over to George, who's the country manager for High Spirits Ireland. Yeah, George, do you want to introduce the tasting to us all?
Well, thank you very much for having us, Luke. First and foremost, we're absolutely delighted to be here, and thanks everybody for giving up various football games and coming to drink some of the world's best whiskey with us. And we're very pleased to be working with Luke and the team at Celtic Whiskey Bar, and indeed the Celtic Whiskey Shop, to be bringing you guys this tasting. Usually on the 4th of July, for those of you who've joined us before, to raise a toast to the Stars and Stripes, it has been myself and Ian cobbling together our somewhat limited knowledge about American history and the links of bourbon and how that interweaves with the development of America as a country and so on. And I hope you've enjoyed those. But tonight, obviously, I'm very pleased to have our colleague Drew Mayville, and to introduce Drew. Drew is an absolute maverick and veteran of the spirits industry, and indeed has been with Sazerac, who is the custodian, I suppose, Drew, would be the way to put it, of the Van Winkle range. Drew's been working with Sazerac for almost 20 years, and many years before that in a variety of roles in Seagram as well. I'll let Drew speak to his experience momentarily. But yeah, just want to issue a very, very warm welcome to everybody. And thanks to all the team at Celtic Whiskey for having us. And looking forward to a really good tasting. So without much further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Drew Mayville to you all. Thank you very much.
Hi, thanks for joining me this evening. Here it's about 3 o'clock, so I brought my Uncle Sam hat, my 4th of July hat. Just don't think you want me to wear that, but I thought I'd show you. So tonight we're going to have a lot of fun. We'll start off with, let me see, trying to get my slides here. We'll start off with the topics that we're going to talk about tonight. I'll talk a little bit about me. We'll talk about who Sazerac is. I thought we'd talk a little bit about the Van Winkle history because that's an interesting topic. And we'll talk a little bit about tasting, how to taste like a pro. I just developed some techniques and tips, and I thought we'd go through that. That I thought would be interesting for some people, especially with this group. And we'll talk a little bit about the selection of barrels for Pappy and the tasting process that we go through. And then I thought it'd be interesting to talk about Buffalo Trace Distillery, since that's where it's made, and how we make bourbon. And then throughout this agenda, we'll taste some of the Pappy lineup, the 6 bottles that we have here. I suspect everybody's got a sample, right, Luke?
Yeah, everyone should have a sample of the.
Do they have one like this, one each?
It's not that big, but
no,
no, it's a small bit smaller. It looks like this, Drew.
Oh, that's not too bad.
No, we've had worse, as the fella says.
I see Steve has a lovely bottle of Rye down there.
Yes. Well, it's actually, I'm doing this from home because I figure that if I drink it, I might just continue on afterwards. I don't have to worry about driving because I'm about 45 minutes from the plant. So as a matter of fact, I drive that every day. So it's because I live in Louisville, and actually, here's my first slide. I'm the master blender. I thought I'd get off. I don't know. Some people don't have a sense of humor, but I thought this was kind of funny. Regardless, my background goes back over 40 years now in the beverage alcohol industry. I worked 23 years for Seagram, and actually, I became the master blender for Seagram. I actually started out in the distillery, and that's where you learned all about the process of making beverage alcohol. And that was like the best place to work ever. When people went to that part of the distillery, you never left. You retired from that position because it was so interesting and it was the place to be. But because I started out and I was the youngest, they were looking for someone to go to the bottling operation. And they picked the youngest because it was me. Nobody else wanted to go. So I actually went over, and that was the best thing that could have happened because I learned how to taste. And that's where I really developed my expertise in tasting. And I actually moved from there because you're tasting all the products from incoming spirits to aged spirits to finished products. And even working with the bottles and the caps and stuff, that was really interesting for me. And then I moved up through the organization, and I figured out that I could actually make more money in management. So that's where I went. Working as a lab technician just didn't pay the bills after a period of time. But then in management, I got into the manager of quality and different positions in Seagram. Eventually, I moved to Montreal, which was our head office for sensory work for Seagram North America. So that's where I ended up. And I eventually became the master blender for Seagram. And then all of a sudden, Seagram was sold to Diageo and to Pernod Ricard. And since Diageo took on most of the matured goods, I went with Diageo. And I spent almost 2 years with them before I got the call to come down to Buffalo Trace. And actually, the slide there says 16 years, and it was actually over 17 years now. It seems like I have to keep updating it because it's closing in on the 23 with Seagram. So 17 years at Buffalo Trace. And actually, when I started at Buffalo Trace, absolutely nobody in the world heard of Buffalo Trace Distillery back then. So back in 2004, virtually nobody heard of the name of this distillery. And in those short 17 years I've been with Buffalo Trace, we've actually come a long way and become one of the most well-known distilleries on the planet. And so, like I said, I was the last master blender for Seagram before it was sold. And then people ask me, what does a master blender do versus a distiller? Because Harlan Wheatley is our distiller, and Harlan is responsible for the making of the different various spirits that we make, the distillates, and then putting them in warehouses. And then I take all that at the end and start making products, ensuring consistency from batch to batch. And probably the most interesting, exciting thing for me as a master blender is making new products. If anybody knows who we are at Buffalo Trace and Sazerac, we're making new products all the time. So that's the real excitement for me. And I just wanted to prove that I did work in this industry for 40 years. Here's a picture of me back in 1982. And that's in the bottling lab where we're testing, like distillates, we're testing maturates, we're testing incoming goods, final products. And you can see back in the day, it's probably before your time, Luke, this tie here, that's a tie. I don't know if anybody knows what that is. I have to explain that to some people. And then the other thing that you should notice is that there's a spittoon here, and that spittoon is for spitting. So we don't drink because we look at so many samples, and I'll prove that to you. Here's the typical day at the office here for me.
Wow.
And you can see the amount of samples, and this is on a light day. There's 4 tables. We actually had 5. We took one out because of COVID. We want to keep some distance between people. But you can see the tables are pretty well full with samples that we look at throughout the day. And this is the actual lab that we're doing it in right here. So any of the Pappy or any of the Buffalo Trace products are looked at right here. I do have another table in my office because I can't walk this far to these tables sometimes. So I just look at some samples in my office too, especially when I'm developing new products. So a little bit about Sazerac, because you hear that name a lot and some people may not know who it is, but our vision at Sazerac is to be recognized and respected and a highly successful builder of global spirits and one of the industry's most desired places to be. Now that's very aspirational, but you can see what we're trying to do with Buffalo Trace being really the blueprint. We want to build global spirit brands. And to this day, a lot of our brands are, US centric, and we're building it globally now. And, as Ireland as being a great example. And that's taking a lot of time because a lot of our products are aged. So we need to put away more distillates and let them age up to the age that we need them at. So that takes a little time to get that, because we have so little product and so much demand, it's hard to fill it. And that's why a lot of our products are very hard to get because the demand is so high and what we have available at the time isn't. So you can rest assured we're putting more away every day. As a matter of fact, in the last 18 years, we've put more away every year I've been at Sazerac and Buffalo Trace. It's just never has been enough. So here's an example of some of the distilleries that we own now at Sazerac, Buffalo Trace, and that's where the old Rip Van Winkle distillery is located, and that's where we make that Van Winkle product. 1792 distillery, which makes some excellent products too. And stay tuned, we're making more for the future as far as new products. And a distillery in India called the Paul John Distillery, which you may have heard, is really getting a lot of accolades now. We have a
And
distillery.
Drew, we actually did a tasting with Paul John on Wednesday night.
Fantastic.
And it was
Was
absolutely
Michael
fantastic.
with Michael?
It was with Shilton.
Okay.
Who's their European ambassador, and it was incredible. Really, really, really impressed by the whole range. It was fantastic. So sorry for that interruption.
No,
I know some people
welcome.
listening in are on it.
Let me just mention that anybody, if you want to ask questions, just interrupt me, because that's the best way to interact instead of waiting. Our old Montreal distillery, which probably not too many have heard about, is a distillery we started up a few years ago. It was an existing distillery. Before it was Sazerac, it was the Corby distillery. But regardless, we're making quite an investment there. We've actually started a distillery, and we're making very artisanal type products on a still that we have, 2 stills there. So the oldest product that I just looked at a couple weeks ago is about 3 years. So it's pretty close to being called Canadian whiskey, but it's not ready for us to make new products yet. We're doing a ton of different mash bills and different styles of whiskey, which will be very exciting in the future. The only thing you have to be worried about when you work with these types of products is that it takes so long for them to mature. So you have to be very patient. I'm so impatient. I want to make something right now, but I can't. We also have the A. Smith Bowman Distillery, Tennessee Distillery, which still isn't putting out a product. There's just laying it away and aging it. We're making Tennessee whiskey. We're making bourbon there, all kinds of interesting things. And then we have a distillery that doesn't distill as the Last Drop. And Last Drop is really a unique proposition where we sell basically the last drop of different products, different spirit products around the world, whether it be cognac, whether it be scotch, something that you will never taste again. So it's a very exclusive and pretty expensive. You might even have some products there, Luke. And then we have our cognac distillery, Domaine Sazerac Zigonzac, and that's where we're making some very unique and I think quite revolutionary products using grapes that haven't been used traditionally as far as the last few years by the major players. It's an organic site, so there's going to be, I think, more flavorful cognacs. And again, they're aging, so they're just aging up, and we're starting to develop products with them. So that's Sazerac as a snapshot. Really exciting for me because I get to be involved with some of these distilleries. So I thought maybe a little bit about Van Winkle, and maybe after a few more slides, we'll have a first taste of the tenure. But old Van Winkle Distillery it's relatively young, 4 generations. And back in the late 1800s, Pappy Van Winkle, he was a traveling salesman with Weller and Sons. You hear that name, we have a product called Weller. And at 1935, he opened up the Stitzel Weller Distillery, which is really quite famous now in Louisville. And unfortunately, when bourbon took the downturn, he had to sell it back in 1972. So he sold all the labels, he sold all the rights except for old Rip Van Winkle. And then his son, Julian the third, took over in 1981 when his father passed away. And basically, Julian, that I work with that I work with currently, and his son Preston, who joined 2001, is who I work with. But that's where it basically came from. And Julian was looking for a place to make his product because he didn't own the distillery anymore, and he had these aging stocks that he put in some packages, the 20-year-old and 23, because they were old. And he needed a distillery, so he joined up with Buffalo Trace Distillery. As a matter of fact, it was only in 2002. I think it was around June timeframe. So if you can add up on your fingers, that means like some of our products may not have been made at Buffalo Trace, right? And they've come from different places. So there's been some variability there. But we're getting close, and because 2002 and the 23-year-old will soon be Buffalo Trace. So there's a lot of history there in the last 4 generations, a lot of ups and downs. As a matter of fact, when I started at Buffalo Trace back in 2004, it's funny because you could buy it at the gift shop, Pappy Van Winkle, and it was actually dusty on the shelf. I mean, Julian was telling me that there would be retailers calling him up and saying, can he take this whiskey back because it wasn't selling? So in a short 18 years now, it's probably been the most sought after bourbon in the planet. And it sure has changed since then. And I guess that's a good thing, because we sell everything we make. Everything almost we make is allocated in terms of Van Winkle, but also Buffalo Trace. No questions. Good.
So far, that's an incredible thought. I think it was so difficult to shift not so long ago, and it's become such an iconic brand now. It's quite the rise.
I don't know. I always ask, why is that? And bourbon obviously has taken off, and I asked, and they said that not only were they getting some high ratings, but Anthony Bourdain, he was promoting it, but saying how good it was. And you start putting these things together, and it's being a great product, it starts taking off. But everything in bourbon took off. But this became the holy grail, basically. And it's the most sought after product, I think, on the planet in terms of bourbon. Mm-hmm. And I thought, sorry?
No, I was just going to say, before your photographs earlier on of you doing the tasting, Alan in the chat there said that was him during lockdown, and I thought that was quite a witty comment to draw attention to before we moved on. But
yeah, I just actually got the picture from Preston. I thought it'd be interesting just to see who these people are. People see, if you look on the back of the 23-year-old, you'll see Julian there. I don't know if I can show you. He's the little kid in the back, and that's him on the left there. So that's Julian, and Preston, his son, is on the right. So he's the next generation. So it's kind of neat to put a face to the name. Mm-hmm. Again, one of the most famous and highly rated whiskeys in the world, and it's made of wheat. In other words, the second component of a bourbon. And usually the wheat gives you a much softer and smoother, sweeter taste. And I think it's very well known that it takes longer to age. They can age longer than bourbon and gracefully, more than a rye bourbon, for instance. One of the reasons is not just the grain, but it's the proof that goes in the barrel. It's usually quite a bit lower proof as opposed to a rye bourbon. And then in a blind taste test, the Beverage Tasting Institute gave it 99 out of 100. And it's, that's quite special. That's getting close to perfection. I thought you'd be interested in this one. Whiskey doesn't solve all your problems, but it's worth a shot. I saw that in a bar, outside a bar in Seattle. That was kind of interesting. And then the next topic is evaluation of whiskeys, but maybe before we do that, maybe we should taste the 10, because this is on a Friday night. I think we need to do that.
Sounds like a plan.
So does everybody have a sample? I suspect they do. If you don't, I'm so sorry, but try to visualize. So the first thing we do is, as everybody knows, is we nose it. And this is 10 years, and it's 107 proof. So that's quite high. It's 53.5% alcohol. And I'm going to go through some of the nosing techniques. So let's just skip that for now. Let's just nose it right now. It's hard to get interaction. Usually I like it when people interact, but I'll just, because if I say it smells or tastes a certain way, people start, oh yeah. But I like the interaction, but let's go for it.
Well, Drew, most of the amazing folks who do our tastings are good at typing in their own tasting notes. So I'm sure normally it takes them about a whiskey to loosen their fingers and their tongues, and then they'll be flooding in. So I'm sure
Okay,
in due time we'll have loads of tasting notes.
great. So when you nose this, you're going to get a lot of caramel, vanilla notes. You get that dark fruit, maybe some cherry notes. You're going to see it as we progress through the line, they become more evident. And you know, those baking spices, the nose, yeah. And then you get the taste is the same as the nose. And when I say that dark fruit, as I tasted it, I could just taste the cherries rolling across my palate, those caramel notes, sweet corn. You get the oak, of course. And then as it transitions and finishes across the palate, you got that nice bourbon type spice, oak caramel note, and a dryness in the back with a slight oak tinge to it. It's quite rich for 10 years. And then the proof, I think, accelerates and highlights some of those flavors. Some people may see a little bit of a peach note too, and tobacco notes just starting to come out. It's a really good one to start with, the 10-year.
It's absolutely gorgeous. You wouldn't think it was 53%. Aaron there says it's spicy on the palate. It's definitely got that spice.
Well, when the ABV is like that, that's what I find. It just accentuates, or it explodes on your palate, the flavors, to me personally. And I think that's why a lot of the people who enjoy bourbons and other products like this is that amplification of flavor because of the proof. As a matter of fact, when I'm developing products, I look at the proof within, one or two, and just to see what is the optimal for that particular product. So I don't know on this one how they arrived at the 53.5 or the 107 proof, but for me,
sorry, Joe. I think it goes back to the old. It was the old bottling. It was old Fitzgerald that Pappy used to do. I think it was one of those ABVs or something similar proof. I think.
Yes. Sometimes I ask Julian, why is that? And he says, I don't know. So I don't, he's funny. No, what I really meant is, did someone actually say this is the best proof for this product? And they went through my exercise of trying different proofs. Because sometimes I can get an award-winning product by the proof, by tweaking the proof. It really affects the balance and the flavor profile. So it's very, very important. Maybe I'm getting into too much detail. Sorry.
No, it's fantastic. It's a refreshing conversation to have in a post-proof society. Coffee tinge to it, says Philip. Cormac says really got the kick of caramel at first. David says honey, cinnamon, vanilla. Suri says vanilla, definitely cherry, also apricot notes for me, both on the nose and palate. So this would be all virgin oak, Drew, would it?
Yeah, but bourbon by law has to be brand new oak barrels. Yes,
because it's always amazed me with a lot of the Buffalo Trace range that, like, we were drinking some virgin oak Irish whiskey the other day, and it becomes very tannic. It kind of really was the wood was so present in the gums, whereas this is so fruity and peachy and cherry, as you say. Is there a specific trick to that? Is that down to the spirit itself, or?
Well, those are all big secrets, Luke. I can't talk about this. No, actually, it's a good question because I deal with it all the time. As a matter of fact, today I was looking at some Canadian whiskey, and exactly the same thing was happening. But it's because it's partly, I think, because of the temperature that these barrels are at, and it's because if, for instance, in Kentucky, it's a new barrel and it's very hot, so you're really driving the reaction in the barrel wood. Whereas if you have a cooler temperature, it's not driving it in, so it's staying more the surface area. So it depends on where it's aging and the temperature that I believe that gives you some of that. And also, the lighter the product, the less new barrel you don't want to put in a new barrel. For instance, even Irish whiskey, and Canadian whiskey, the base whiskeys, you never put in a new barrel because it's too light. It would just be overwhelmed. So there's a balance there. As a matter of fact, I'm blending some rum right now, and I'm using new wood, which is very tannic, but I'm blending in it at a percentage into the final blend, which really adds a dimension to it. So you can use it to your advantage, what you're discussing right there, depending on the project. So there's about 100 answers to your question.
Yeah, well, you've answered it brilliantly there. So thank you. Just come to a few more questions there in the chat. Paul says
Sure.
the finish lingers for a very long time on the side of the tongue. Amazing for a 10-year-old. Jonathan says, can I ask what kind of blending would have been done to this?
So when we, as everybody knows, that all whiskeys that we make are blended except for one. And the one that isn't is a single barrel. So when we make this, we have a barrel selection process that I'm going to talk about, but basically we approve every single barrel that goes into this blend. So once we approve the barrels, we look at a composite of all those barrels, and if we like it, then it becomes Pappy 10. If we don't like it, we start jockeying barrels around, so we find barrels that suit the needs of what we're looking for. So
the mash bill, sorry,
I'll get more into it a little bit.
But the mash bill is the same base spirit, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that might be the confusion, because in Ireland a lot of people refer to marriage when it comes to casks. You're marrying casks of whiskey and you're blending styles of whiskey, like a grain and a malt.
Right, but this is still blending because you are selecting the barrels that go into the blend. Mm-hmm. I know it's different, but it's much the same.
Yes, of course. The logic is the same.
So here we don't like to call it blending. We like to call it marrying. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a subtle distinction. Basically, you're blending. I don't care what you say.
You tell them.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to come touch a few more of the questions. Aaron says, maybe my mind is playing tricks, but I can really see the connection between Eagle Rare on taste. McGlue says he thinks there's a lot to do with the genius of the wood, or genius of the wood, which I presume is down to the question I was asking about virgin oak. And then Owen Halen says, do you think that the requirement for brand new barrels holds back the development of bourbon whiskey in terms of scope for experimentation, or does it maybe protect the brand and stop people developing quote Frankenstein whiskies? Do you sometimes wish that bourbon had more room for creativity?
It's a really good question. The thing is, we have the creativity because we have other things we can call it. So we can use used barrels. We can use all kinds of things. You can't call it bourbon, but we do explore with those other things very much so. As a matter of fact, I explore with all different types of whiskeys, Canadian and other types of whiskeys, just because we have more flexibility. But with bourbon, I think it does protect. So he's right on both counts. It does protect bourbon. Because it is very specific. So you don't have all kinds of types of bourbon and lower quality. So you really protect the brand, I think. But at the same time, we still can experiment with other products. So I'm not too worried about that. Excellent. I did want to start talking about organoleptic evaluation. We call it organoleptic, which is sensory. So we have all these experts around the world. And forgive me if I didn't put your expert on, or whoever you like, but there's so many experts, and they all taste and they all have opinions. The only thing I'd like to say is that everybody on the call has their own opinion, and I value those opinions just as much as any of these guys, because they're just one person and they have their experience. But I guarantee you the people tasting have their own experience and knowledge. And we're not trying to satisfy these people. We're trying to satisfy the people drinking our products on a regular basis. But we really want to, I always like to highlight that we taste the recipe with our different products. So when we look at a wheated bourbon, you can see it's corn, wheat, and barley malt. And it's a majority corn, at least 51%. And so when I say taste the recipe, that's basically what you're doing is you're tasting the corn, you're tasting the wheat, and you're tasting the barley malt. Barley malt lesser because the other ones are dominating. And the barley malt's used mostly for enzyme action in the fermentation process. But wheat really is a soft grain. And it really accentuates a lot of those sweet corn notes that come through, those fruity notes. And then you have Rye Bourbon, which we're not talking about tonight, which is basically the same, at least 51% or majority of corn. Then you have rye as your second grain, and then barley malt. So rye gives you that spiciness. So 95% of all bourbons are made this way. Only about 5% are made with the wheat instead of the rye. So this is going to give you that rye spiciness, give you a different taste profile. So this section is called How to Taste Like a Pro. We're going to talk about some glassware, how to nose, how to taste. And again, there's many different ways, and I think you have to do what you do best and nose and taste the way you like. But here's some other options. How we do it at Buffalo Trace, and then that's it. So let's talk about glassware. This is something that people ask a lot about. So here we got a lot of options. First of all, we have what I call the Copita glass. This is what we generally use in our lab. Then we have this one, which everybody knows is the Glencairn glass. This one's coming on strong, the Norland glass. You can see it's a glass within a glass. I don't know if you're familiar. It's got similar structure to the Glencairn, but it's much wider at the top. And the neat glass here looks like a little spittoon to me, but it's got a really wide open mouth, and it's got a nice area to swirl in. So believe it or not, each one will give you a different approach in nosing and smelling the characteristics. Now, just to give you an idea, this Copita glass, which is what we tend to use, or the Glencairn, a lot of distilleries, you see how these both, I'll just flip to the next slide. You can see this type of glass is very, the Glencairn is more rounded in the bulb in the bottom, so you can swirl nice. This one you can swirl too. Then it really funnels up this convergent sides, so it really funnels up the flavors, and that's including the alcohol. We call it alcohol anesthesia. So you get that burning or that dulling of your senses because you're really focusing all the aroma and flavor at the top of this. And you can see it in the slide there at the very bottom. And then this one too is the same thing. You see how it's a small rim, convergent sides, and really it crowds out. You really just smell a lot of alcohol. So what we've done in the lab that we're at is when we use this glass, and this is very traditional, this is a traditionally sherry. What that does is we actually have lines on our glass. So we put in, say, a barrel strength sample, but we put water up to the second line, so it's around 20% or 40 proof. And what that does is dilute it down so the ethanol doesn't overwhelm you, because otherwise we'd be smelling a table like I had on the previous slide on the right side. If we were to smell that and taste that, you'd be burnt out after a few glasses. So we've got around some of these issues by how we do it. So if you look at the other two glasses, this neat glass, you can see it's much wider at the top and it's kind of divergent. So it's kind of spread out. And the same, or the Norland glass, and this is the neat glass, the same thing. You can see it's divergent, so it actually spreads out. So what happens is, in theory, the alcohol fumes tend to go outwards and the aroma more towards the center. So it's not as much of that alcohol anesthesia. So each glass can give you a different, there's no perfect glass, by the way, but they'll all give you something different in terms of what you can see. It's kind of interesting to do it with the same product and just see the differences between them all. As a matter of fact, women tend to really be at a disadvantage because they're more sensitive. And this one is very, if I give it to some of our female panelists, it's really strong in terms of ethanol. Whereas when they try these glasses with the wider rims, they see much more of the flavor because they're so sensitive. So depending on your sex, depending on your what you're given with from the grace of God, depends on which one will suit you better.
Well, we've got I'm drinking out of two a glass, Drew. It's the Irish whiskey
another one.
glass.
Right.
So it's yeah.
So it's divergent, right?
Yes, it is.
The
It is
lip.
divergent. Yeah, yeah. As you can see,
Right,
it's quite tall as well.
Yeah. So if you
with a short
compare
stem.
that, compare it with the same product. It's really fun to do because you'll see different characteristics. So that's one thing I'm assuming everybody on the call would probably know is that the glass really depends on the glass, and it really you can heighten your appreciation depending on the glass.
And David in the chat says he's using his two tonight rather than his Norlin. Genuinely like geeking out on glass choices though, so I'm sure he really enjoyed this section of the tasting.
So some rules we have in tasting is we eat and drink bland food prior to tasting. No sweet, spicy foods. As a matter of fact, even our sequence in tasting products, say for instance, would go from vodka all the way through to bourbon, probably gin, and sweet products like Fireball would be at the very end. Because once you taste Fireball, you're shot for hours. So we do the same thing with the sequencing is important as we should do with food, because as soon as you have a lunch and then you go back to tasting, you have a whole different perspective. So most of mine is done in the morning because that's the best time for me. And everybody could be different. As a matter of fact, this morning I was in at 6 o'clock in the morning doing some tasting because that was the prime time for me.
Nice. Is it true that in America, back when the the state was at its younger stages, that spirits and whiskey would have been traditionally a breakfast drink, and that wine and beer would have been drank in the evening, or is that an urban legend?
I've never heard that before.
It's probably a lie. So
I think they probably drank it when they wanted to drink it. And you know,
if that's 6 a.m. then how about?
Yeah, that's right. Well, remember, I don't swallow. I have to spit because I can't. I gotta drive, so it's going to be a problem. So I don't get the full appreciation that you can when you're drinking at home. Personally, I believe whiskey is perfect as it is, but if you need to add water, it does open it up if you add a small amount. As a matter of fact, when I'm tasting, say, the antique collection, I do it straight, but then I also do it diluted. So I just want to be able to look at it straight all the time. So you always try it straight and then you dilute it down. You can use drops. Sometimes you can use more because we want to look for differences, and that's what we're looking for when we're assessing. We're not there to enjoy it. We're there to assess it. And then, you know, as everybody on the call knows, you taste it first, and then you let your senses, sometimes the shock of it, especially with the ethanol, depending on how high the proof is, you let it adjust, and then you taste it again, and then you taste it again. So you just don't taste it once, obviously, when we're assessing. I thought this would be fun. Some techniques. Some of these are pretty interesting because there's the ramrod methodology. So you just ram your nose in. And some people do that. Maybe they're they like it. They can see things. You can see experts do this, and then you smell it. So that doesn't work for me, but because I can't taste the top notes that way or smell the top notes. And then there's the drive-by taster, the noser. Just go really quick in and out, and that works for them. But then the slow poke is just someone who hovers around the top and then gets those top notes and then enters more towards the glass. Because don't forget, a lot of the taller glasses, a lot of the aromas, the heavier ones, are in the glass, whereas this type of glass you're closer to the top. So you're getting different aromas too. So it's interesting how close you are to the liquid. And then there's the round the clock noser who rotates the glass, you know, in a circular motion. And at the same time swirls. So it's it's aerolizing the aromas. And then there's the alternating nostril technique. This is very important, and you might laugh when you hear it. I mean, when you read it off the slide, but your nostrils actually close and open every 2 to 4 hours. One side closes a little bit, so the air slows down, and one side opens, so the air actually goes faster. So when you're nosing, it's good to go on both nostrils because one's more sensitive. So the really best way to do it is you just put your finger on your nose and smell one side, and then do it the same, the opposite. And you're going to see a difference between the two. And then when you smell with both, it's almost like stereo, right? You're putting both together. So it's really important to understand that, you know, naturally your nostrils change and you have more oxygen going in and one slowing down. And I think the theory is that you don't want to dry out your nasal passages. So it's actually lubricating as it's closed like that. But the amount of air going through will get different types of smells and aromas. So it's important to find one that works for you, that you can smell the best. That's all that's trying to say. So when you do nose, there's no wrong answers. Sometimes people say they find, oh, I see this characteristic or I see that characteristic. I don't think it matters. You see what you see. Some people are blinded. We taste we have a panel of about 25, 30 people, and there's people who are more sensitive to different characteristics. Some are blind to certain characteristics, but we do actually train people and they actually become more proficient if you practice. So it's amazing to see the proficiency because the awareness is first and then there's the practice at different levels. We look at some compounds that we're looking at are parts per trillion. So it gives you an idea, like that's like one little part in an Olympic-sized swimming pool that we're looking for. And you can smell that. It's just amazing to me. And then everybody says, well, we can measure it on our GC gas chromatography. You can't. You can measure it, but you have to know what you're looking for, because when you start talking parts per trillion, that's quite a low number. And TCA, for instance, cork taint is parts per trillion. So it just shows you your nose is pretty sensitive. So warming the glass can be quite good. It volatilizes the aromas. Some people will say you shouldn't do that because the alcohol vaporizes. It really depends on the individual. I always like to smell with my lips parted a little bit because I want it to go through the nasal passages. So if you ever look at a picture like this off the internet, you can see the nasal passages are through right back to the back through your mouth. So when you breathe in, you get it circulating, and that's where you're going to pick up a lot of the flavors. And then the other thing is that a lot of people ask, well, how can you become better at this? Well, one thing is, just like you're doing, is you have bourbon clubs and things like that, or you have whiskey clubs. But a lot of people use these types of things to start expanding their knowledge and their vocabulary. So these flavor wheels are very important. So for instance, for bourbon, you can talk about, let me see, spicy. What does spicy mean? So people think spicy means hot. But you know, it's the pepper, like everybody knows, the nutmeg, the ginger, vanilla, etc. That can be called spicy. So this is a good aid for people starting out.
Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely something that a lot of people I know struggled with is not the picking out the flavors. It's articulating
yes, what
you're getting.
You. Yeah, that's the hardest part, is that you have to have, well, our hardest part for our taste panel is calibration. What does this smell like? And that's the hardest thing to train people on. So the vocabulary is, like you say, very, very difficult to do. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. So the more you drink bourbon, the better you'll be at it.
There you go. You heard it here first.
Yes. I always like to say when we start tasting now is that, you first take a sip. As a matter of fact, everybody has seen the sweet, the sour, the bitter, the umami. So you get all those flavors, and then when you have your nostrils and you're breathing in, you get it through your nasal passages, and that defines the taste. So it has I always like to say it has a story. Each whiskey has its own story and how it tastes. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. So what we do is we just roll it around our mouth. So upon entry, you get a certain flavor profile. It transitions mid-palate. And eventually, as you swallow, it has a finish, and it just stays there after you swallow. And we like to call it, when you roll it around in your mouth like that, the Kentucky chew.
And is that the same as the Kentucky hug?
No, the Kentucky hug is when you swallow it. You get that sensation, that warming sensation.
When you say it like that, that suddenly went from being, that was quite sweet, Kentucky hug. And then when you say it's when you swallow it, that's quite aggressive.
But when you do it, you're really getting the flavors across your palate. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
In Scotland, they say it's a Glasgow kiss.
Glasgow's kiss, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to remember that next time I'm up in Glasgow. So again, breathing aids in your perception and the balance of the whiskey. And then you have your finish. Even now, as you taste, what do you have as far as the taste? Maybe we should taste something else, right?
That sounds like a plan.
So we got the 12-year-old Lot B Special Reserve. Now, sometimes people ask me, what does Lot B stand for? Does anybody know?
I think Ian knows.
I don't know.
Well, basically, when they started making it, and this is before I was here, but Julian had a Lot A that he put aside. And basically that Lot A was for this product. And then there was none left. So he got more, a big batch. And I guess back in the day, if you didn't have certain, continuity, you had to buy these products. So he called that Lot B, and that lasted for quite a long time. And then rather than saying Lot C and Lot D, he just stuck with Lot B. So that's how simple the story is. So let's nose this 45.2% or 90.4 proof. So a little
different.
Yeah, it's so different, isn't it?
It's almost like a candy floss bubble gum on the nose.
And you even get, I get some mint and clove, maybe some honey and pear. Yeah, it is quite different, isn't it? Amazing.
Aaron says sweeter and lighter on the nose. I definitely agree. Maybe even some maybe touch of strawberry and yes, honey.
I get an orange note
well.
too. Yeah, yeah, like a beeswax.
Yeah,
I always find the 12-year-old just seems much lighter and spicy even than a 10-year-old, even though it's longer in the barrel. You obviously have that decrease in proof though, so it's
That's right. Yes. Like I said, just a few percent make a huge difference on how you perceive a product, and you can see certain characteristics. Right away, I get a lot more oak up front, but it transitions to a brown sugar, caramel, almost a nutty taste. And then it finishes almost like a coffee, light coffee, bitterness, a little bit tart. But you do get that vanilla and dark fruit underneath all that. But you can see the difference on the taste as far as the oak is concerned, I think.
It's a tad drier. It's a tad
Yeah.
Mm.
Don't forget,
Paul,
as we, yep.
Sorry, no, go on, Drew.
No, as we get older and older on these products, because it's the same mash bill, you're going to get more complexity and depth. And the oak obviously is going to inch in more and more as we go through this.
Paul says the 12-year-old is almost savory. We can't put his finger on the flavor he's getting. And Owen says very summery to me. I definitely see the summery because there's almost a barbecue spice at the very, very end, just kind of lingering in the finish for me personally. Maybe that's just one of those suggestive things when he said summery and I'm thinking, oh, that's what I'd like to be doing.
Well, we are famous for barbecue in this area, so maybe that's true.
David says, I feel like I'm beginning to get some tobacco on this.
Yeah.
A much drier finish in the 12-year-old and less spicy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's almost that lemony tartness too. But you really finishes with that dark oak flavor and even I think dark fruit in the background too.
Drew, the one question I've always had around the Pappy range is the proof is very finite on them. So like 45.2, how do you get down to the finest decimal of a percentage of ABV? Do you start with whole percentages and then start to funnel it down, literally go from, feet to inches kind of thing? Is that how you arrive at it? What way does it work? I've always been intrigued.
Yeah, I can't talk to how they did it here because I've asked Julian and he didn't really know. But I know I do exactly what you just described. Is if I'm developing something, I look at the range of proof. I start actually with uncut, unfiltered, and then I move it around. I do big, wide swaths, and I look at an area where I think it's the best for this particular product. Sometimes I come up with the uncut, unfiltered is the best, and sometimes it really it comes down to that 100 proof or 110 proof, or it comes down to the 80 proof, depending on the product. But when I'm developing something like right now, I really do get down to the percents, and it's rarely I would get down to the 0.2 because I don't think you can tell the difference. But sometimes I think people think it's more crafty if there's got a 0.2,
okay,
Yeah. So there's an element of that going on. But from my point of view, that 0.2 versus 45 is not going to make a difference.
Okay.
Not a huge difference.
Thanks.
But 45 and 46 will be different to me.
Emma in the chat.
Was that good, Luke? Was that good taste?
I mean, it sounded good. So you're the experts, like the three of you, like, and it was a great question from George.
Yes.
So keep them coming, George. I always thought it was, and this is maybe an ignorant thing for me to say, but I always was like, this is just, they're adding on the points just so they can tell, because the points vary slightly, don't they, in the antique collection? So I wondered how much of it was down to the 2017s was this percentage.
Well, that's a different question though. The antique is done differently.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, because I actually, when we pick the barrels, you could be picking more barrels from lower floors versus the upper floors. So it really depends. Mm-hmm. And that's how you get different proofs quite a bit. It's quite a bit different.
Mm-hmm. And Emma in the chat here says it's a salty finish. And Paul, who was mentioned savory earlier on, reckons, yeah, that's salty. He's like, that's where I got the savory from. Bingo, Emma, fair play to you. And Catherine says, how do you determine what proof each product is bottled?
How do you determine?
You've obviously worked out the alcohol percentages, and then you make a decision, you make a call on where it tastes best, as we've touched on. Is that? Oh,
you're saying when you're developing a product?
I'm not sure. Maybe we can move on, and Catherine could
because
just clarify the question. And we, rather than us just this, and yeah.
So when we do pick barrels for Pappy, we use our tasting panel, but we basically select the best barrels we've got for Pappy. And We do our organic evaluation with our glasses and down to 40 proof. And we look for samples that match what we expect in terms of the standard. And it's done by our taste panel, because our taste panel does all our products. And then it's also personally done by Julian and or Preston for all the barrels for every Pappy barrel. So if this brand becomes 10 million cases someday, they'll have to taste all those barrels. I don't think it'll ever be that big. But each barrel is looked at before we actually put it together.
Sorry, Drew, I know it's a question I get asked quite a few times in doing these events. In relation, we just tasted the 12-year-old
Right.
Winkle, but the 12-year-old Weller, the only real difference I tell them is that they're picked by Preston and Julian, and it's,
yeah.
I suppose it's those honey spots that we have in the warehouses that we know about. So
yes,
I'm telling the truth, I am.
Yes. Yeah, we pick the best of the best for the Pappy. And everybody knows that we are partners with the Van Winkles, so we're picking the best for them. And then they have the final say. If they don't like them, they don't like them. We'll pick other barrels. So, but we're our distillery in Holland is really consistent as far as the quality, very good. But there's some locations that would be slightly better than others for sure. And like our 23, we don't have a 2023 at Buffalo Trace. So it's definitely set aside for them and for this line of products. Good
Drew,
questions.
given how long Buffalo Trace Distillery has been running and how long the rick houses have been there, I would imagine we have a pretty good map of where those, as Ian referred to them as honey spots, are in each of the rick houses. Does all of the Pappy come from one particular one? I know Ian, in his background here, has Warehouse C, which is one of the oldest ones in the distillery. But do the barrels come from different types of rick house? Because obviously we have some are steel clad, some are stone, some are timber, and so on. So I just wondered if we could ask you to comment a little bit about where the barrels live while they're maturing.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. When we run, say, as an example, the Pappy 23-year-old, we put in 53 gallons, and after 23 years, there's probably on an average around 10 gallons left a barrel. So that really gives you an idea of the concentration of flavors. Now, you're not going to put that barrel in, say, the top floor or Warehouse C, because first of all, after maybe even 10 years, there's not going to be anything left, because it's warm up in the top of Warehouse C. So with the other products, for instance, you would be having a mix of different warehouses, because some will age differently depending on where it's aged. And that's kind of why we marry them or blend them, is that we have a good cross section from different warehouses. So for instance, when we put away wheated whiskey, it's put away in many locations depending on the products that it's going to have eventually come about from that particular location. So there'll be select locations all over the plant and warehouses for us to make all these products. It's not going to be, oh, you just have to put it in this warehouse and that's it. No. And that's really a blender's dream, because you can actually blend it then after, because you don't want to rely on something that is in one location where it's not right. Then what are you going to do then? So as a blender, you can actually make it consistent from year to year if you put it in different locations, because each location will be slightly different. So I'm not going to get too specific, but that gives you a good idea of how we plan. Is we put in many locations for different products depending on how old they're going to be. Certainly don't want to put 23-year-old in the top of a warehouse that's hot.
Sure. Well, I've been lucky enough to stand in Warehouse C, as I know Ian has as well, in the middle of July, and even on the ground floor, you can only stand in there for so long, because Kentucky is hot in the summer. Yeah, so I can imagine what it's like on the top floor. One of the questions that's been asked a couple of times, and I don't think we've answered, is the volumes that are produced. So what kind of total output do we get on some of these? And obviously, you're probably going to have to give 5 or 6 answers here, maybe. But what kind of output
No.
do we get on an annual basis?
As far as cases, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
No idea.
Bottles,
No idea, George. I don't get involved with cases ever.
Somebody
That's
else's
always-
department, right?
Well, yeah, but also we don't divulge volumes traditionally, and there's lots of reasons for that. One of them is we're a private company, but we usually don't say how many cases we produce, especially on Pappy, because everybody would be angry. They would say, "Why don't you make more?"
And there's always the price challenge as well on Pappy. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but just remember, when you put 53 gallons and you get less than 10, that's not very much. It's going to take a long time to age that up. I mean, that's 23 years from now. So we're putting away whiskeys for 23, Pappy 23 in 23 years right now.
Sure. Well, I remember, just to, if it in any way helps to answer the question, as when I set up the business for Sazerac in Ireland, one of the early requests I sent across the pond to the United States was, I said, well, if I'm going to start selling some Buffalo Trace bourbon, we're going to have to start doing some tastings with the guys around 4th of July. We need to get some Pappy. And I got a raised eyebrow, and they said, you need to go shift some Buffalo Trace first, and then we'll talk. So I had to go and earn some stripes, even just to get a little allocation for Ireland. So the one thing I can say, guys, is we are getting inch by inch, we are getting more and more. As we sell more bourbon, we're earning more stripes, and we can twist our arms a little better. So that gives us, particularly with the guys in Celtic Whiskey, it gives us really good opportunity to give an audience like this an opportunity to buy a bottle of Pappy at the right price. So yeah, but as I said, inch by inch, we're getting more and more bottles every year. So that's the good news.
We normally have a set in the bar, George, and when pre-COVID, when we used to have our American friends coming over every summer, filling the place, the reaction it would get being seen on the shelf was just like nuts. Like, people were like, oh my God, I always try to get this in my local bar and I can never. It's amazing. I've never seen, I don't, there's no other whiskey brand in the bar that has elicited such a reaction than that one. And we've got some really special bottles in the bar, like, so it's a testament to the brand. And maybe on that excellent question, and what I just mentioned there, Owen asks, how do you feel about the company? how do you / the company, sorry, feel about so many bottles ending up in the secondary market straight after release? Do you have any thoughts on that, Drew? Or maybe even George, have you any thoughts on that yourself?
No, we really despise that. We want people to enjoy the products at the suggested retail price, period. And actually, we've been taking some legal action as much as we can to try and prevent that secondary market, because that was not the intent. Our intent is to build brands. Our intent is, for people to enjoy our products at a reasonable price. So we're totally against that secondary market. And I think, George, I don't think you have much to add, but if you go ahead, if you do.
Well, the one thing that has always impressed me since I started working for Sazerac is, to be fair, we probably undercharge for a lot of our products. Even when you look at the likes of Buffalo Trace, for the whiskey and the consistency that you get in that bottle, we probably should be charging more, but we always charge a very fair, affordable price. And that's one thing that has impressed me. And Luke, when it comes to the likes of Pappy and the antique collection, I always personally feel a really deep sense of disappointment when I'm offered a bottle, as a personal whiskey buyer, and I see that it's got a 0 added on the end of the price. It's something, as Drew says, we absolutely despise. And that's why, working with the likes of yourselves and obviously your colleagues in Dublin, this is why we don't get a lot of these bourbons here, but we do want to make sure that people are afforded the opportunity to buy them at a fair price. And that's why when we do as we call it, the lottery, but when people come in and they buy one of our products, they get an opportunity and their name gets drawn out of the hat to buy one of these bottles at the correct retail price, as opposed to the astronomical prices that some of the secondary wholesale and indeed people sell out of the boots of their car, unfortunately. So it is something that we can't control at all, but we do our best to set the right example.
Oh, fantastic. Speaking of which, I don't know if we want to try the next whiskey, Drew. Do we?
Yes. Yes. I would like to switch it up, though. How about straight rye whiskey? 13-year-old.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
I've been looking forward to this one all day.
This is actually coming clean. This is the only one of the range I've never tried before. So I like yourself, Ian. I'm really excited about the rye.
Yeah, this one is 95.6 proof, 47.8% ABV. And so this is not a bourbon, by the way. This is a straight rye. And when I say straight rye, that means a majority of the grain is rye. The second grain is corn and then barley malt. Okay, Ian, what are you smelling?
It's quite light, a little bit of, like, there is a little bit of spice there, a bit of clove or something, or a bit of aniseed starting to come through a little bit. But that sweetness is still
Wow.
there, so you're...
I really get a lot of honey, peach, cherry notes. You get an undertone of citrus too.
Right.
And you get maybe like a maple syrup type note too.
It's quite
Oh,
sweet.
it's actually quite soft on the nose. Did you say that? I think you said that, right?
Mm.
It makes you want to drink it, right?
It definitely does. Philip in there in the chat says orange. Cormac says a lot of peach sweet. Owen says, wow, that's so different, so much lighter and less spicy. John Fleming also asks, how many usually of the 13-year-olds make it over to Ireland?
It's the first
Very
one.
little.
This is the very first. No exaggeration. This is the very first bottles that have ever landed in Ireland. The only other place I've ever seen a bottle of this was in a bar in Belfast called Bootleggers. And I remember our sales rep up there rang me and he said, "You're never going to believe what I'm after finding." And the next time I was up in Belfast, and we literally went in and took photos of the bottle and sent it to everybody else going, "Look, we're after finding the 8th wonder of the world in Belfast." So, but this is actually the first time we've ever had the 13-year-old rye in Ireland, and you guys are the first to join us for a tasting on this. So it's a nice moment.
You really get a lot of this creamy the first really creamy vanilla type frosting up front, really initially, and see how it transitions across your palate. It eventually transitions to that rye tanginess and spiciness.
It's extraordinary. It really gives you a lot to chew on. Aaron says a lot more rye spice in the palate and distinctly Pappy tasting. It's a nice combo. Owen says it reminds me of very sweet French single malt that I tasted once called Brienne, and I couldn't find sense. So there you go. That's the highest compliment you can pay any American whiskey. Compare it to a French whiskey. Jared Kelly says, thank you for that. Only Pappy I don't have at home. And Cormac says, that's right down my street. So some great feedback coming in there.
The mid palate, you get that fruitiness come through. Really unique. Along when it's balanced with that nice rye spiciness, and then the finish with that oak. Just a beautiful balanced whiskey, I think. You might even get notes of licorice there, especially on the finish. But you get that fruitiness, that pineapple, maybe guava type fruit, like ripe fruit.
Paul here in the chat says apple tart and custard. That's really, really interesting. Because I not tasting notes I personally would have reached for, but now that he says it, I can taste it. It's that suggestive nature to whiskey tasting. But
yeah, it's amazing how your mind can be diverted. That's why I usually like to ask people, see what they think before I say anything.
Mm-hmm.
Drew, is a question I have. Is this the similar mash bill to Sazerac Rye, or is it? It is.
We only have 5 mash bills or core mash bills. We have other mash bills, but very, very specific. I love the age, and I think the proof is dead on. I think this is really a nicely balanced whiskey. If you like straight rye. Yep.
Sorry. Is there a reason why behind 13? Because it seems like an odd number that normally you wouldn't see in terms of whiskey.
I'm not aware of any reason other than I think it's a good age.
Yeah, it definitely tastes good anyway.
Yeah, I could drink that.
It's
John?
quite a nice mix from, because obviously we've tasted the 6-year-old quite a bit, and I've had the pleasure of tasting Sazerac 18 a good few times. But this slap bang in the middle, it's kind of perfect.
Yeah.
18 sometimes just, I like it, and then I don't know, I look for more. But I think this there's just a little bit. I don't know. I think it's just super, really.
Yeah, I like your assessment. It's not like a handy where it's really in your face, and it's not as subtle as the 18-year-old. Each are brilliant whiskeys, but this one's kind of in the middle. It's kind of balanced. Yeah. I like the balance of this one. Yes.
Cormac there says balance is a perfect word for that. A pleasure. Can you remind us of the ABV of this one, Drew?
Yeah, this one is 47.8 ABV.
So it doesn't taste, as punchy as the last two. Personally, I think it's much lighter on that side of things.
Yeah, but
just
it
for my
ends
own
up
palate.
being really. I think it comes on. It comes on later. The spiciness that you taste, that it's a straight rye.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So I like that building.
alcohol
I think
punch.
that's a good quality to have, that building of flavor up into that rye spiciness. And then the finish is kind of medium. It's still there.
Really, because I was going to say it's probably got the longest finish compared to of the first three for me personally, but maybe that's because we're after three whiskeys. Aaron says, I tend towards Wild Turkey rare breed for a go to rye forward whiskey, but this is just as nice with its own twist. So, there you go.
I think, Luke, back to your point on the age statement. I think in Scotland and Ireland, I think there's a set of guide rails that we just default to, driven by single malts, which is 10, 12, 15, 18, 21. And I think when we see something that's, a 13-year-old rye or an Eagle Rare 17-year-old, it's odd to us because we're used to those kind of that suite of numbers, which is the 10, 12, 15, 18, 21. And I think, but that's also, I suppose, it creates quite a pleasant oddity to the whiskey as well, is that, it triggers that, well, why 13? And, I suppose Drew's being very polite and saying, well, why not? I mean, if it tastes right and it's the right age, then it's the right whiskey. So, but I think it's probably because we are who we are. We're obviously possibly a majority of Irish people on the call, and maybe some of our Scottish friends as well. I think we just tend to default to that round set of numbers. So, but whereas in the States, it's a lot different. You get a much greater range of age statements, and but at the end of the day, I suppose it's subjective to the finished product, I suppose, is where Drew would come from as a blender, right?
Yeah. Well, that's just another tool in my toolbox for differentiating products.
Yeah. Well, George did introduce you earlier as a maverick, so there you go. Owen says it's a 7 p.m. whiskey, perfect before dinner as opposed to after dinner. So Owen has his dinner late, so we all know that now. Coffee, send me to bed, happy whiskey. George made a great point. We're conditioned towards certain ages. So excellent comments. Keep them coming.
Yeah, when you age something 13 years in Kentucky in a new barrel, it's aging. That's a long time because you're really driving that whiskey into the barrel over those 13 years because of the temperature differences. And if you were to age this same whiskey in a colder climate, it's going to give you a different product and probably not as rich and complex. So 13 years in America and Kentucky is a long time.
No, fantastic.
Okay. Maybe we'll just talk a little bit about Buffalo Trace because this is where it's all made. This is what I walk into work here. It's pretty cool having a vending machine with Eagle Rare in it. No, actually, it's Pepsi and Coke. So everybody knows we've been making whiskey since 1773 through world wars and floods and prohibition, where we made medicinal whiskey. And as a matter of fact, Buffalo Trace itself was just initiated in 1999, so it's a mere 21 years old. So we've been called a lot of different things in terms of distilleries over the years, from OFC to Carlisle Distillery to Shenley Distillery, all kinds of different names. But in 1999, it was renamed Buffalo Trace Distillery. And then we found out that we had actually one of the old original distilleries we call Bourbon Pompeii, because we were renovating and we actually found the remnants and nobody knew that we're there. This is the way they used to make bourbon, all by hand, obviously. And here is the original building with fermenters. This is just a lithograph. And then when we were excavating, under this concrete, we found remnants of the old distillery just down there by the ladder. You can see, it looks like Pompeii. That's why we called it Bourbon Pompeii. And there's the actual original fermenters. One thing you got to remember, these fermenters were all lined with copper because E.H. Taylor believed that copper was an improvement to the taste and the quality of the product. So everything was copper lined in his day. So here's an example of what we did is we relined it with copper. And now we've been making batches for the last few years of different products and fermenting and distilling it. So now we have a new line of products coming out in the future that you'll be able to taste the old-fashioned way, which will be kind of cool, I think. And we've come a long way from whitewashed buildings to the original buildings. We've retained, this looked like a prison camp. This is your warehouse C, Ian, to today. Yeah, much more visitor friendly. But one goal has never changed at Buffalo Trace. We want to make the best whiskey in the world. And that's been the vision ever since I've been there and before. As a matter of fact, one of the buildings that we have this sign that Pappy Van Winkle actually said, "We make fine bourbon at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always, always fine bourbon." That's a pretty good motto, right?
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic.
We never compromise quality. We have a variety of different tastes with our different mash bills, different warehouses. We age barrels longer. We're going to taste 23-year-old. We have Sazerac 18-year-old, just older than most distilleries even age products. But the last thing that we do is a lot of innovation. We have, I think, some of the most innovative products, and we have lots of experiments going on any given time. People always ask, why do we have so many awards and all that? It's because I think it's everybody pulling together, doing following the vision of the distillery. It's a great leader. It's all the people. It's Harlan. It's everybody that's important in making a successful distillery. So how we make bourbon? Well, before I do that, let's talk about what affects the taste of bourbon. I think you might like this. Basically, aging. If you have a 3-year-old versus a 23-year-old, you're going to get definitely a different in taste. The barrel makes a huge difference. Not only the barrel, but specifically the seasoning. In other words, how long it's left out in the air before they make a barrel, the char, the type of wood. So you've got all these different components of this wood, and depending where it comes from, if it comes from Limousin in France, or if it comes from Canada, if it comes from the US, different types of wood, it's all going to give you different flavors. As a matter of fact, we even have a series of different, they were experiments, but we have a brand called Charter Oak, which I doubt you see in Ireland. But basically, we have very special species of oak, like Chinkopin or Canadian oak, and we just age those products for a number of years, and we show you the differences between them. And I think we're on our 4th or 5th different type of oak. So all that's telling us it's really affects the taste. Obviously the grain and the mash bill, whether it's a 4-grain, whether it's a regular bourbon, there's so many different variables there and how it tastes. You know a lot about our warehouses already and the locations. Depending on where it is, you can have the same liquid taste entirely different from one warehouse to the next, even within the warehouse, obviously. And then the distillery, if we made another distillery to match Buffalo Trace, it would never taste the same. So the distillery itself and the processes that we have are very important in the taste. As a matter of fact, even one company I worked at, we tried to duplicate a product and could never do it. And we actually brought the still everything and just couldn't do it. It's a really difficult process to duplicate in different locations. So even if I told you the recipe of what our bourbons are, you could never duplicate our bourbons. Oops. Yeast is extremely important. One thing that people don't realize, we only use one yeast at Buffalo Trace. Whereas other distilleries, even when I worked for Seagram, we use quite a few different ones at Four Roses because we owned Four Roses at the time. And that gives you different flavors. Then, of course, the flora, the fauna, the water, all that stuff is very important to affect the taste of bourbon. So there's a lot to dig in there, but I want to give you an overview of that.
Drew, there's a couple of questions around barrels in the chat here. And
okay.
Obviously, in Ireland, we import a lot of ex-bourbon barrels to put some finishes onto Irish whiskey here, as they do in Scotland and many other countries. The question is, what typically happens to the Pappy barrels? Is there much competition for them? And are people allowed to say we've finished our product, whatever it might be, in Pappy barrels?
That's a really good question. There is really a lot of demand. Obviously, there's not many barrels, but using the name Pappy is very difficult. So I don't think you're going to see too much of that. If there's anything ever going to be done with that, it would be us aging our products in Pappy barrels. And I don't know if we call it out, actually, just because of the name and the partnership we have. So there is a tremendous amount of interest in any of our barrels. But let me put it this way. We're using some of our best barrels for products that we're putting in. So we have all these operations around the world. So, you know, we're doing experiments right now with rum, and we're putting in some of these barrels. It's just exciting because they're going to be great tasting products. We do it already with Corazon, which is our product, is a tequila. And we do finishes with some of our antique collection with those barrels, and they're very popular. It's called the Corazon Expressione, and it's very, very popular. So if we're ever going to do anything like that, it would be us. And if nobody else could use the name if we ever gave somebody some of barrels. Good question.
So in short, we keep all the good stuff for ourselves.
Do you blame us?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
And bourbon has to be made in the US, majority corn. We can't distill it higher than 80 ABV. And then again, that's to maintain the taste integrity and the flavor profile. And new oak container and maximum in the barrel at 125 proof. One thing that might be of interest is when we put our wheat in a barrel, even though we can put in at 125, we put it in at 114. And that's part of the reason it gracefully ages and you can age it longer. And then, of course, no artificial flavoring or colors are allowed. So what you see is what you get. Very pure definition of a whiskey.
And Drew, is there a difference between bourbon and straight bourbon? You mentioned about rye and straight rye earlier on.
Well, straight bourbon is aged at least 2 years.
So if something is, if something just says bourbon on it, is it less than 2 years or?
Well, if it's bourbon, then you can have it. You can have it 3 years, but it has to say the age on the label. But if it's bourbon with no age, it's 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, usually you won't see bourbon with an age. If they don't state an age, it's 4 years plus. if you look at some of the micro distilleries here, you'll start to see straight bourbon, and anything younger than 4, they have to put an age on, and that's going to discourage people from buying it because it's pretty young. It's still more distillate-like.
Yeah. We have another question in there from Cormac saying, obviously, Pappy releases a small amount of bottles every year, but is there any ambition to release a larger scale? Is the supply there? The demand clearly is, or is it going to stay niche?
I really don't get involved with the amount we put away, other than we put more away every year. Just remember back when I started, Pappy was sitting on the shelf. So how would you know to put more away back then? Like a lot more. You'd be wasting your money, right? So that 23-year-old wasn't even, that wasn't even 23 years ago. So you need 23 years ahead of time to figure out how much people are going to eat or drink of this product. So it's really difficult to put so much more away, then all of a sudden you can't use it. I mean, it's a challenge. It's all I know is that whatever we forecast, it'll never be right, whatever forecast it is. So it's a difficult question to answer, but we do put more away every year.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely, whiskey worldwide, that the hardest element, I imagine, is trying to project future sales. Maybe we might come on to the 15, Drew. What's your reckon?
Yep, I'm ready. They're probably
Fantastic.
all finished by now, everybody, right?
We're Irish. We were finished about half an hour ago.
Yeah.
Paul asks, we got Paul and Owen's 2 questions there, but we'll maybe roll them into one. Paul says, why did you say container earlier as opposed to barrel? And Owen asks, where do your oak casks usually come from?
Yeah, some countries, they have oak container, so you can have, some say even small oak, which means a small barrel. So sometimes you can have like a tank or something in some countries. I don't know why they put container there. That's the first I ever even noticed it, actually. But in Canada, for instance, they say small oak. So what does that mean? I mean, it's up to interpretation. What did they say for Ireland?
They normally say cask, I suppose, rather than barrel. Although, so I suppose it normally is a barrel rather than a cask. Is it?
Some barrels are
barrels, but not all barrels are casks, as they say.
I suspect so. But sometimes you can use large barrels, but it wouldn't age this very well. We actually have we had experiments with larger barrels just to see how it would taste. Obviously, it didn't taste very good after so many years, but who's to say in 50 years it wouldn't taste good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's actually a question. Maybe if you want to introduce the 15-year-old, and I've got another question for you.
This 15-year-old is 107 proof, 53.5.
And is this the first one that has the Pappy Van Winkle smoking a cigar on the label?
Yes. Those other bottles, except for the straight rye, used to be in a squat bottle. Now they're in those other long bottles. Those were some of the original.
Or the decanters, kind of like memorabilia kind of stuff they used to sell, wasn't it?
Well, the pot still type bottle, I guess.
Cormac is already in the chat there saying this 15 is big on vanilla.
I don't know which one you have. I have the 2016 version. So
I'm not sure. Maybe George or Ian would know.
No, I'm just thinking it might be a little different from what you're smelling and tasting.
Mm-hmm.
I just picked
19 or 20.
I think what we're trying here is the 19. Am I right?
I would
Yes.
guess.
Steve is nodding. So this is the 2019. Yeah.
Yeah, this one has a tremendous vanilla bomb too. It's kind of like, definitely whoever said that was right on the money. Candy corn, some tropical fruit notes. I still get cherry for some reason. Today I'm cherry.
Dreaming of that cherry pie, huh?
I'm starting to see more leather notes now too, especially on the taste, the buttery, oily mouthfeel. more tobacco, maybe dark fruit, prunes. You can see how it's prunes. Nobody wants to say prunes, right?
Paul says loads of spice up front and dissipates away to a nice candied apple. I think that's very well worded.
This for me is my favorite Van Winkle by a long shot. It just ticks all the boxes for that big mouthfeel, the vanilla, the toffee sweetness, loads of spice, and you kind of have. I get loads of that barrel spices side of your tongue, and then you get a load of dryness comes in as well, and your mouth starts to salivate, and then your mouthfeel just runs back your tongue then again, and it just is going and going. It's just fantastic.
When I say I'm a 20-year-old man, I'm clearly not a 20-year-old man, but you know what I mean. Myself and Ian always have a different opinion on this.
Gorgeous. That's what's wrong.
This is really starting. The richness and the complexity is starting to kick in now, because we're getting to an age where I think it really starts to show. And that, to your point about the 20-year-old, this is starting to show some of those characteristics now.
Mm-hmm. I think it's got more of those characteristics that you might associate with an Irish ex-bourbon, where you kind of get those green apple, orchard fruits, the vanillas in a more recognized. But now it's way more complex. It's a gorgeous whiskey, but there was something about it that was more familiar to me than the first few. But then again, maybe that's just because we're 4 whiskeys deep. Aaron says spice forward, like the 10.
Mm-hmm.
David says it may have been the mention of apple and custard earlier, but definitely getting stewed apples. Aaron says you think it's slower than most of the old RIP 12 to 15, or you drink it slower. Owen says delicious. Okay. My wife is scared of whiskey, and she just tasted this, and now I'm never going to get the glass back. So there you go. That's
a good thing.
Compliment. No, it's absolutely. Oh, there's so much going on there. Jonathan Ramirez said this is way better than Love Island. Which I don't know if you get Love Island in America, Drew.
No, I know it. I'm sure it's one of those reality shows.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's basically Geordie Shore or Jersey Shore, or any of those. Like, yeah. But Cormac says the layers and textures really starting to grow.
Now
this.
Don't pretend you don't watch it. It's okay.
I don't watch it, but herself watches it, so I have seen it.
So some people, it's starting to finish a little more bitterness, more of the tannic notes. So some people don't like that. Some people really love it. So, especially as you taste it a few times, it's starting to show some of that characteristic. And that's why, as you go up, some people are turned off by that big oak.
Well, that was going to be my other question, Drew, is and I don't know how apocryphal this is, and I'm glad you're here to set the record straight, but I had heard that a lot of these the older age statements in bourbon come from a reaction to the popularity of Scottish single malt, rather than the idea that the whiskey itself lends well to older aging. Now, I've always kind of been put off by that idea, because I taste these mature bourbons and they're fantastic, but it's definitely something I've heard. Would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, if you can reword it differently.
Well, I suppose that's a lot of age statements on bourbons wouldn't come naturally. That it's a reaction to the popularity of age statements, other age statement whiskeys on the market.
Yeah, this has been like this for how many years? Quite a few years.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it's new. I think 15 years is a long time for aging bourbon in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I don't even know what your question is, but I hope I'm answering it.
No, it's I suppose so.
I think
I'm better
Drew,
off reading questions than articulating questions.
I think it speaks to I suppose the fashion of having an age statement comes and goes on whiskeys, and it's something like we see it with Scotch, and a lot of them suddenly veer away from age statements and just talk about the product itself. So it's I suppose the question is more to what does that mean to American whiskey, and is it a very typical thing, or is it more about the the terroir and the different type of distillery and the location of it, the different techniques and mash bills and that kind of thing? I mean, one thing I've learned about a lot since getting more involved in the bourbon industry is the mash bills, and the range of mash bills is absolutely phenomenal. And this, with the resurgence obviously of Irish whiskey distilleries now, we're looking at a lot more historical mash bills using the likes of oats and all these kind of wonderful grains that we grow in Ireland, and it's really opening up away from just the true kind of barley and malted barley, and people are really diversifying.
Yeah.
So that's I suppose that's what the question really looks to.
The thing is, as a blender, I'm not really interested in age. I'd look at taste profiles. So to me, these all are age. These are aged, but I mean, as far as declared age, but it's the taste that I'm looking at, and I try to match that. So I don't even think of the age really, but I know a lot of people think age is important. But some of our best, well, Thomas Handy is one of our best whiskeys. It wins constantly quite a few awards, and it's one of our youngest whiskeys. So age is not the big factor for me. It's more the taste profile that we're trying to match here as a blender.
Horses for courses, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's a question there from McGlue. Says a lot of the age statements on this side of the Atlantic have an advantage in that they age in refill barrels and are put back in the oak and it pulls back in the oak spiciness in a way that bourbon can't. So I suppose that's their thoughts on barrel maturation. Jonathan says pandan on the finish. Not sure if anyone else is familiar with pandan leaves, tropical plant from Southeast Asia. I know I certainly am. It's down here in Kerry, but maybe Ian and George or yourself, Drew, are familiar with them.
No.
Thought it was a typo for a minute, to be honest.
Never come across it. No.
Well, there you go. Every day.
Maybe Jonathan, you could give us a couple of notes to help the guys actually identify the flavors you're getting, and how we identify pandan would be interesting. I'm certainly Googling that right now as I speak.
No, John, it would be great if you could expand on that one. That's really interesting. Might be another one to add to the flavor wheel, Drew.
There you go. We're always adding.
I'm going to rewrite the whiskey flavor wheel here tonight, guys. Yeah.
Well, while everyone else in the chat is furiously Googling pandan, do you want to come on to the next bit, Drew?
Yeah, I just wanted to zoom ahead a little because I think one thing I talked about before was the innovation. And we have so many experiments and innovation that we're trying to figure out what's happening from our warehouse X, where we're actually aging barrels in a warehouse to determine what's the best warehouse conditions. I don't know. Here's a micro still that we have that we're doing experiments on. We've been doing experiments for quite a few years. Warehouse X. And then we have a product line. I don't know what's going on here. Must be too many drinks. All these experimental, wow. These are experimental. I don't know if you see these in Ireland, but when we have an experiment, if we feel they're good enough, we actually put them in bottles so you can see how the experiment turned out. So if you came, for instance, to my lab, you would see a lot of these experimental bottles on the shelves, and you can taste these things. As a matter of fact, one of them was our 4-grain, which won a lot of awards. It was an experiment to start, and when we found it was a great whiskey, we made more of it. So this is how we develop products for the future, at least one of the ways. And so to your point, we had talked about is we want to make more bourbon because we don't have enough. Everybody asks, how come we don't have enough? But we are making more and more all the time. Here's some of our expansion pictures. These are fermenter bases. There's the fermenter going up. And this is all completed now. There was no roof on at the time, but there is now. And our next phase is our still, adding another still, which is our next phase. and that will be done next year sometime. So this is all trying to keep up with the demand and the future demand, which we're planning out for years, 23 years to come. And that's how it's going to look. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the consistency of flavor and the stills,
yeah.
and how do you manage that when you're expanding stills and that sort of things, or is it that new stills and new mash tuns and fermenters just adds to a growing flavor of the brand?
Right. Well, for instance, when we've added all new warehouses, we've been monitoring how it's aging over the last while just to make sure it's consistent. It's actually quite remarkably consistent. So the same goes with these products, whether it's a new fermenter or if it's, and if you look at it, we tried to make it very similar to what we have in terms of volume, etc. So it's not going to deviate too much from the current. And same with the still. So it'll be very similar to what we currently have. The thing is, if there are differences, then you have the blender that comes into play to start blending products to make sure it's consistent. So there's lots of solutions, but ultimately you want to make it as consistent as possible. And Harlan is probably the most consistent distiller around. He strives to be consistent day in, day out with everything that he does as far as the process is concerned. So that's the beauty of doing this, is that we're monitoring it as we're doing it and making sure that it's going to be the same as we currently have. And then if there are some variations, maybe we'll have some new products. Who knows?
Brilliant. Yeah, it's all part of the evolution, I suppose. As much as brands try and stay consistent, you try whiskey from a company today and 30 years ago, and they're never exactly the same. So yeah, we're all on a journey.
Well, when I've heard that people say it's never the same, but who remembers 30 years ago what it tastes like? Just because you have a bottle doesn't mean it tastes like that when they put it in the bottle.
That is an excellent point, actually, that I've never considered.
I've tasted Prohibition whiskeys, and I don't think any of them taste very good. Maybe they didn't, but I bet they tasted better than what we see now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did we want to try the 20?
Yeah,
before it gets too late.
While we're pouring that, Cormac has a chat in there or a comment in the chat saying, I find that when I get above 54% ABV, I tend to struggle and add a drop of water.
Yes.
The Blue Spot killed me. Much preferred with water. That's a relatively new Irish whiskey.
Same here,
yeah. He says, does Drew add water to a higher ABV or not?
Well, if I was just tasting to assess, I would say no initially, but then when you do assess, it's straight, then you add some water, see if it opens up, because sometimes you'll discover other flavors. Yes. So
or
this
Janine,
20-year-old
thoughts on adding water to the whiskey? Or
sorry, is that to me? Was it?
Sorry, I was saying you mentioned there about you thought the same about the Blue Spot, George.
Yeah, I was given a gift of Blue Spot, and I was very excited to get it. But like that, I found the ABV very challenging on it. And don't get me wrong, it's a fabulous whiskey, but I don't drink it now without adding a drop of water to it just to open it up a little bit. It's completely subjective, and my philosophy with whiskey is always as follows. What goes in the bottle is what I call the distiller or the blender's truth. They're delivering it to you in the bottle the way they want you to try it. After that, people say, how should I drink whiskey? I say, I don't care as long as you enjoy it. That's the most important thing. So whatever you need to do with it. I get a bit excited when people drink Pappy with Coke, but if you need to, I'm being extreme when I say that, but if you need to add a little drop of something, some people prefer all their whiskeys, drop a single ice cube into it just to open it up and cool it down a little bit. It's completely subjective. But as I say, you always get the truth the way it's intended in the bottle. Always start with that, as Drew says, and then adjust it so that you enjoy it. That would always be my philosophy with any drink.
Mm-hmm. Cormac says Diet Coke, so there you go. That's his preference.
Absolutely.
Coke Zero.
Avoid the sugar tax. Absolutely.
So Drew, we're on the home straight now. Tell us about the 20-year-old.
Well, this is one of my favorites here. There's a burst of flavor when you first nose the 20.
I told you, Ian. 20. I told you.
Everybody's got their favorite.
I'm not going to comment.
Really, I think you start to see the weight and the oak flavors come out quite strong, right?
It's a real soft, I don't want to use the word, but it's not the right word. It's like a mustiness. You can really get that oak, it's in a long time in an oak barrel. The mustiness is not the right word, but there's something there when I smell this that
Well, it reminds me of walking into
Lovely.
a warehouse
yeah.
and you get that, it's almost like a buttery, creamy note.
That's gotta hurt, Drew. Now walking into a warehouse.
It's good. Yeah. Okay. I think we're almost done, right?
Aaron says some. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to read some comments, but you're. What
No,
you're saying is
I
more
get
pertinent.
I get some of the same characteristics that we've seen previously, but really now you're getting more of that weight dominance from the oak. But you get that raisiny, butter creamy cherry note. Vanilla, of course.
Like a candy floss note kind of starts coming into me, like a
Yeah.
rich sweetness.
You get all the dark fruit, you get maybe even touch of maple syrup.
Maple raisiny, definitely. Aaron says, "Don't laugh, but grass." But I think there's no laughing there. I definitely think
No.
freshly cut grass comes across on the
Yeah.
nose. Jonathan says, "Strong wood." Owen says, "Really get the oak." Shane says,
Yeah.
"Get a nice green apple to it." Cormac says, "Tobacco." Jonathan says, "A bit like a cognac," which is a really interesting note. It definitely has a sweetness and woodiness. I can totally empathize with that taste note. Sherry says, "Oak is forward note." Wayne says, "Wow, that's the easiest." That's the easiest word to describe the 20, and no doubt it's the only time I'll get to have this. So thank you. Cormac says, nearly a peaty, dare I say. So he almost gets that smokiness. We get that a lot. I don't know, given your experience, Drew. A lot of people that I don't mean with the 20-year-old we get a lot, but a lot of whiskeys that I would find really wood forward. A lot of people say smoky. Where do you think that connection comes from that kind of that smoky or woody, or do you think it's just very subjective to people's personal tastes?
Maybe it's this charring and stuff gives you that smoky flavor, but the smoky you're talking about, I don't get on this.
Mm-hmm.
But for them, they do.
And that's the beauty of it all, how subjective the whiskey taste is.
It is subjective, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I get lots of spice and cinnamon and nutmeg. You get that leather notes. And then it really, on the finish, you get a lot of that oak spiciness, dryness. And it fades right to that fruitiness in mid palate. And then back of the palate and a little bit on the side, you get that dryness, the tannic note from the oak. You would expect it for 20 years to be in a barrel, a much stronger oak. I don't want to say it's balanced, but it's definitely oak dominant on the finish, but it's still not as strong as you would expect it to be. And I think it's counterbalanced by that fruitiness and the spiciness.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Darius, as you mentioned earlier, sorry.
Some people like Ian might like 15-year-old better.
It's 10 and 15 for me, Drew. I always find when I'm doing these tastings that 12 and 20 seem to have the same DNA. They seem to have that same style. It's like they're just a little brother and a big brother as such. And I find 10-year-old is quite the same. 10 and 15. They kind of share that same spice and flavor profile and style. And then 23 is an older mix of both of them.
That's why we make both, right? One for you and one for George.
You should have told me before.
But it's like Blanton's. Some people prefer Blanton's versus Buffalo Trace. Some people prefer Eagle Rare versus Buffalo Trace, depending on your preference. It's very, very, like George says, very subjective.
Mm-hmm.
But I bet everybody
100%.
on this call will like the 20-year-old, except for Ian.
That's the nicest way I've ever heard anyone say they're wrong. But
I don't know whether you read the book, Drew, but the Pappy Land book with which Julian was co-wrote, I think late last year. But one of his favorite drinks would be I suppose when he's treating himself, is a Van Hatten, as he called it. So it was 50-50, 13-year-old Rye and 15-year-old Van Winkle with an Antica formula started down. So, I mean, look,
man with expensive taste.
Yeah, absolutely. And just go back to how, I suppose, how it's all subjective, but how we drink our whiskey. I think all the Van Winkles drink theirs with a cube of ice and a twist of lemon. Is that right, Drew?
I don't know. I don't socialize with them out of work. Only taste with them.
I'm guessing, but yeah, that's what he said in the book, so I'll believe it.
Everything that's written down is definitely true. Dara says, you mentioned earlier the 15 in a barrel in Kentucky has a heat time has in the Kentucky heat is a long time. The 20 and 23-year-old obviously even longer. Is there a limit to it? What's the concern with the length?
Yeah, so what happens is it's becoming more oaky. Eventually, most people say it's just too much oak. So it's too tannic, it's too much wood over time. Well, you think 23 is too old, but we actually did a 25-year-old Van Winkle. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I would suspect there was like 700 and some bottles done. And I was concerned that it was going too far, but once we processed it and filtered it, it turned out really exceptional. But I bet that would be worth a lot of money having one of those bottles right now.
George, look at us, the bottle. So
those were sold many years ago.
Sorry, Luke, you're breaking up there. Say that again.
I could have brought one to taste, but I didn't know you wanted one.
Look, hindsight's 2020, as they say.
So there is a limit, and what we're doing now is exploring the boundaries at Buffalo Trace. So we have a special warehouse we're experimenting with to prolong the aging process, so we can get a 50-year-old bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, I might not be around by the time it turns 50, but at least we're starting this experimental process because lots of people think it has to be aged a long time to taste good. Well, we're going to find out.
And maybe this is a really stupid question, but obviously, we hear a lot about the virgin oak and the different parameters that make up bourbon. In Irish whiskey, if it's below 40%, it's no longer legally whiskey, even if that ABV drops because of it's been matured for 50 years. Obviously, is there a point in which it would drop and stop becoming bourbon, or is it just it
has to be above 40. Most places around the world, it has to be above 40. Yeah. Although some bourbons is sold in different countries, I think that 37 or something, depending on the laws of the country. But it's not really bourbon then, according to the definition. We call it something else.
What would you call it?
Well, those countries would dictate that, I guess.
Cormac says, sorry, Drew, but the 15 wins for me. Jonathan says 15 as well. Owen says, would Drew pair it with anything? Owen says, would Drew pair it with anything like a dark chocolate or cigar?
Most definitely. That's what these products are designed for. Yes. Even Pappy himself had cigars. He enjoyed cigars with it.
But do you have a personal recommendation for any particular one of these in terms of?
No, I'm like George. I'm very politically correct. Enjoy it the way you enjoy it.
Sarah says 13 for summer nights, 20 for cold winters near the peat fire. And Aaron says, 20 is a winter sipper.
These are sippers we're talking about. I would not mix them if possible.
Do you have a preference in terms of time of the year? If it's certain whiskeys at certain times of the year? I mean, I know I love a peated whiskey if it's winter and I'm out having a few pints in the dark.
Yeah, you tend to want lighter flavored products in the summertime, whether it's gin or rum, and then the winter heavier products. I think that's just normal.
But amongst the range here, do you have a preference in terms of time of year?
Anytime these products would go well, any time of the year, if you can get them.
Marvelous. Well, speaking of which, it might be a good time to come on to the piece de la resistance, as the French would say.
Yes, this is a 23, and it's 47.8% alcohol, 95.6 proof. I should show the bottle. Now, this bottle would probably, I think, retail in the US for around $300, maybe a little bit more than that. Again, we're not trying to gouge anybody. I think it's a fair price for that.
No, certainly for what it is, yeah. What you reckon, Ian and George?
I could get it for $300. I'd buy a case.
Oh, wow. I really get cherry up front on this one. Whew. Almond, very nutty, cherry, caramel, vanilla, very balanced on nose. And surprisingly not as strong on the oak as the previous one on this sample anyways. This is 2020.
And is this 2019 as well, George and Ian? I presume they're all the same batch, are they?
I think so, yeah.
All the same year.
Well, the 20-year-old I had was 2016. I pulled 2016. So really, the nose is deceiving. When you taste it, it's a little bit different. Really a strong oak backbone there on taste, but you do underneath that you get those cherry notes, vanilla notes, corn, the candy type corn, maybe a little bit of walnut, raspberries. But you got to look through some of the richness of the oak. What do you think, Ian? A little too much oak for you?
No, yeah and no. I think I appreciate it what it is. If I was picking on my day, my still 15 for me all day, but the 23 it is something special because
Yes.
I always sit back and think about where I was 23 years ago, and I definitely was not sitting down somewhere drinking whiskey on a Friday.
You were in diapers then, right?
I'm not that young, but I was definitely quite a bit younger. I was definitely in bed by now, anyway.
It's got a really silky flavor to it, silky taste and texture, huh?
Yeah, you do. If you kind of think past the oak, it really does evolve into something much deeper. The flavor,
Right.
the depth just keeps developing and developing, and as it dissipates across your tongue, and as the flavor as it finishes, it just stays evolving. So I think there's such a depth of flavor there. It's just
Layer upon layer, but again, like you said, have to get through the oak dominance.
Mm.
I just like to think of it as the backbone of this particular product, and the richness comes through if you look beneath that. I don't know what anybody else thinks on the.
Yeah, Cormac comes and says, "I definitely oaky, but agree that it's agree with Ian, a special whiskey. So many layers." Aaron says, "Really interesting as the flavor develops.
Yep.
Find that far lovelier than the 20." Jonathan says, "Dry but super rich." So that's really, really interesting. Yeah, Ian says, or Paul, sorry, says this hits all parts of the tongue. So it's really interesting.
Fantastic.
And if you really chew it, it starts to, I guess, and I often do this when we're tasting, say, the antique collection, especially with those higher proofs, but actually properly chew it, and as your saliva starts to coat the whiskey, it stays evolving more on your palate. So it's, it just stays going on forever. It's really good.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a really exceptional drop. The finish is extraordinary. Like it's I mentioned earlier that I was quite impressed with the finish in the 13, but this just blows it out the water. It's nuts. Lots of complexity and difference, different from the 20-year-old. Jonathan says definitely sucks your cheeks in. 100%.
Yeah, it's dry.
Paul says the finish is lasting a long time, and then when you think, well, it's done, wham. And when you think it is done, wham. found the finish on the 20 overpowering, but not on this one. That's interesting. And Aaron says this is truly a cut above the rest. Have you ever done, Drew? Have you ever done the tastings reverse, where you started with the 23 and then finished with the 10, and then pretend it's the other way around?
To be honest with you, no, I wouldn't do that. I haven't done too many total Pappy tastings, like you said at the beginning. This is probably one of the few that I've done. I did one in Las Vegas, but that's a different story. I can't talk about that one. But
what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Right. But very rarely do you get to taste all of these products in one shot. So this is very fortunate for everybody on the call.
The one thing that always impresses me about the 23 is we've been listening intently and tasting a range of bourbons for the last 2 hours, and we've gone through an entire range from the amount of time spent in the barrel to the proof. And you would be forgiven for thinking at this stage in the tasting that your senses may be dulled, but then you taste the 23, and like somebody said, wham, it just absolutely hits you out of nowhere, and it hits you with the full range of an absolute bouquet on the nose, a huge range in terms of flavor on the palate as well. And I think, Luke, to your point, if you started with the 23, you'd probably be able to taste nothing else. But I think it is a testament to the 23 that you keep building age, you keep building the amount of time in the barrel and the proof, and then despite the fact that you've tried all of those, and as I said, one could argue that your senses may be dulled a little bit, and next thing you get this huge punch in the jaw from this, and a punch in the nose as well. And I think it's really super. Really punches above the rest.
No, it definitely does. We did a tasting in the bar about 4 years ago with Alan, and on the 4th of July, and it had, I think Pappy 15 was the highest Pappy on the tasting. I think maybe there was one other younger Pappy on there, but in the bar we had the 20 and 23. So some of the customers went, and after doing the tasting, sat at the bar and tried the 20 and 23, and everyone thought the 15 from the actual tasting was the best at the time, along with what Ian thinks. But having done this tonight, I think that's crazy. I think that the 20 and 23 are a cut above the rest. I'd be in George's camp in that regard. And even Owen here in the chat says the 20 won it for him in terms of flavor. Cormac says 15 and 23, so he's taking a diplomatic response. But no, they're all really exceptional whiskeys. There's a few comments there about how much sweeter the 23-year-old is. Do you think there's a reason behind that, Drew? Why it's gotten sweeter in the intervening years?
I'm not sure it's sweeter than some of these other ones, but it's possible.
Customer's always right, Drew. Jared says,
I think it's more of a perception, but more of the wood sugars will come out the longer it is, so that could be part of it.
No, of course. I was being facetious. Jared says 23, 15, 13, 12, 10, 20 for his order. So he's 20 is the last one. Alan says 23 hits the best for him. We've thank you, an absolute pleasure to have Drew and his knowledge and insights with us about Buffalo Trace and Pappy Van Winkle. And thanks to Luke and George, a really special experience. Thank you so much. And I'd just like to ring through it that Drew, it's an incredible privilege to have you on tonight. And it's been a fantastic.
It's my honor. I'm really happy that I could do this for you guys, especially on a Friday night, on a long weekend.
Yeah. Look, everyone's time is finite, and particularly on Friday nights. So it genuinely is great from everyone. As in, it's great. We're thankful for not just you, but also George and Ian and everyone for organising this tasting.
Right.
Phil says was lucky enough to do a BTAC tasting with Drew in the Merchant in Belfast a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember that one, Drew. I hope he gets to come back and do more in-person tastings. Or of that or any of the Buffalo Trace range in future. Do you remember being in Belfast, Drew?
Yes, I do, and I enjoyed that very much. I'd love to go back, but I think COVID probably prevents me from going back right now.
From the 19th of July, you'll be able to travel.
Okay.
Once you have your
guys,
vaccine.
Ian and George will set it up sometime.
Yeah, we'll see on the 20th. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I want to do is, it's one question, Drew, that we always get when we host a tasting around the Van Winkle range is, and something, a message that I always like to close out on is how our audience can actually get their hands on a bottle for their personal collection. I'm looking at a lot of people in the audience here and seeing some absolutely fabulous collections in the background here. I'm looking with envy here at Jared there with his library of whiskies in the background there. And yeah, I think Jared, I think you and I could be best friends. I think it would be remiss of us not to say, obviously, we're drinking rarities tonight, and I want to share with you guys how exactly you can get your hands on that. So what I've done in the chat before everybody leaves is I've uploaded a little JPEG there. So I spoke about as I said, we call it the lottery. But basically how this works is this is in conjunction with our friends in the Celtic Whiskey Shop. And the way it works is each month there is an opportunity for people to buy a bottle of something from the Van Winkle range at a fair price. And how you get into the lottery part of it is you need to purchase a Buffalo Trace Distillery product, so the likes of Buffalo Trace or Eagle Rare or Sazerac, and you give the guys in the Celtic Whiskey Shop your name and phone number, and you'll go into the lottery drum, and if you're drawn out, you will be given the opportunity to buy that month's bottle of the range at a fair retail price. Okay, so if you guys can see that there in the chat, and you want to download that, if you have a particular favorite, you can go ahead and, as I said, buy one of our products from Celtic Whiskey Shop, put your name into that month's lottery. Where we're at the moment is for the month of July, and as I said, this is the first time we've had the 13-year-old in Ireland. So the July lottery is actually for the 13-year-old Van Winkle Family Reserve Rye. Okay, and then coming up in August is the Pappy 15, September is the Pappy 20, and then the Whopper 23 then comes through in October as well, just in time for Halloween. So as I said, I've shared that image. If you guys want to save that down and basically, again, buy one of our products from the Celtic Whiskey Shop, you can put your name into the draw, and if you're drawn out, you get the opportunity to buy the product at a fair price. So as you probably gathered, guys, not a lot of this stuff exists. We don't get a lot of it in Ireland. We asked the very first time at Whiskey Live, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, Luke, we conducted a Pappy tasting, obviously not to the standard that Drew has delivered tonight, but we did our best. But we asked the aficionados during that tasting, we said, look, guys, we don't get much of this whiskey. What do you think is the fairest way to do it? And this was the mechanic that you guys gave to us, and we've continued to run this for you. So we think it's the fairest way that we can get some Pappy to you, and hope you agree with that. So I just wanted to share that with you. There's only one rule, and that is when you buy your bottle, you have to invite me, Ian, Steve, and Luke, and Drew in good time around for a pour, and we'll have a bit more of a chat around bourbon. That's the only rule, the other rule to the lottery. But personally, as always, to my colleague Drew, I want to say, Drew, thanks very much for making the time for us this evening and this afternoon for you. And thanks very much indeed for your time. It's been a tremendous tasting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, George, and thank you so much, Drew. Owen in the chat says he's not seen the lottery link. There is a further up. It's a file to download rather than a link. But if you want to email the email I sent out, or reply to the email that I sent out today about tonight's tasting, and I'll send you on all the information you need. No, it's been incredible.
I'll send you that image immediately after the tasting. No problem at all.
Brilliant. Thanks, George. No, it's been an incredible night. So thank you so much, Drew. There's wonderful comments coming into the chat. Too many than we can get to. But it's really been great. And like I said, if anyone's anything else they want to follow up with, please do send me on a message. For us in the Celtic Whiskey Bar, and I'm only speaking as a small part of Celtic Whiskey here from a selfish point of view, these tastings grew out of COVID, out of a necessity, and at the time when bars were closed and there wasn't a lot going up. And obviously we're not open yet down in Killarney, and indoor dining hasn't returned yet, and I'm not going to make a comment on public health, but it's obviously been a difficult time for the industry. So everyone who buys a tasting pack, be it this one or one going back to last August, have been supporting us and our existence down in Killarney in a massive way. So I'd like to say thank you so much, and that's not just to the customers, but to High Spirits and to Drew, who joins in, because it's been a weird reason why we started doing these tastings, but even when COVID is gone from our lives and we're back to normal, these tastings will still remain, because they've been such a huge success, and the support and the interest from around the the country and from the UK and Europe and America has been fantastic. So thank you to everyone who joins us for all of these. It's been brilliant. Long may they continue, says Aaron. So thanks a million. And listen, Drew, George, and Ian, thank you so much. Have you anything else you'd like to share before we finish up?
No, just want to say happy 4th of July to everybody, and particularly happy 4th of July, and have a great long weekend.
Yeah, I have a good reason to celebrate here. Thank you, everybody.
I'll be on a plane, Drew. I'll be on a plane.
Okay. It'll be gone.
Saturday. See you on Sunday.
Yes.
No, thanks so much.
Absolutely fantastic. Sorry, go on, Ian.
No, I was just saying thanks very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's kind of nice to sit back and listen for one of these tastings and just enjoy it a little bit as opposed to talking. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So thanks very much, Drew.
You're welcome.
Have
a good evening, guys.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see you in Clarny someday, Drew.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, and go enjoy the rest of your evening. We're finished our night here, but it's only probably 5 o'clock there. So
yeah,
have a great day.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks all. Nice
Thanks,
to see you.
George, Ian.
Take care. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
See you, folks.